We Stitch These Wounds is the debut album by 21st century rock band Black Veil Brides. This record often gets characterized as emo or cringy because of its visual and lyrical themes, and while some of those criticisms may be true, that doesn't mean there aren't some absolute bangers. This is the first video in a series of 9 on this channel that I'll be releasing over the next few months around Black Veil Brides. And just for clarification, the songs in this ranking are the original We Stitch These Wounds versions, not the Restitch versions. I will mention their differences between each version, but the actual ranking is based on the originals. Now without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. Starting off in last place is Heaven's Calling. I'm going to kind of reiterate what Andy Biersack said in an interview one time, which was that Heaven's Calling sounds like a song the band just never fully figured out at the time. But I think in Restitch, they improved a lot of the glaring problems that the original had. For starters, Andy's vocals, and especially screaming, are smoother, which just comes with time. This was also one of the only times where I prefer CeCe's drumming over the original. Don't get me wrong, I love CeCe on the later albums, but a lot of the songs on We Stitch These Wounds sound better with Sandra's drums. The biggest improvement made in Restitch is the bridge, however. The guitar solo feels much more polished and the drums are miles better. The new lyrics also give more personality to the section. This whole track just feels much more put together than the original, which often just felt kinda messy. Some more thoughts on the original version though. Heaven's Calling feels undercooked, you could say. A lot of the transitions between parts are awkward and the parts themselves aren't that good to begin with. The verses vocally get very boring, but instrumentally they're actually pretty good. The chorus is kinda eh. The vocal harmonies make the melody sound super weird and I just don't vibe with it. The first half of the bridge is my favorite part though, which is the part with the screaming. The guitar solo after that, like I said, feels wrong, and the Restitch version was infinitely better. Wow, that was a lot of talking for the last place entry. We are in for a long video, boys. Never Give In is ahead of Heaven's Calling for one reason, the bridge, which I'll get to in a minute. Similar to Heaven's Calling, Never Give In sounded like another song the band just never managed to polish on the original record. The verses are once again very boring, honestly worse than Heaven's Calling, and the chorus as well is probably worse. The bridge, however, is infinitely better, taking the approach of a sick guitar solo but with the same tempo as the chorus. The guitars themselves feel much more professional, and the drumming actually fits better than CeCe's rendition in my opinion. The Restitch version isn't a ton better than the original in this case. I'd say it's marginally better, but only because of the vocals. Back to the original, I pretty much said everything I want to say about the musical components, but I do have to take a minute to roast these lyrics. Never Give In suffers one of the worst cases of "my parents don't understand me" out of any Black Veil Brides song. The chorus especially is just kinda lazy. I know the point was to give a clear-cut message to the edgy teenagers listening, but come on Andy, you gotta put some work into that chorus. To be fair to the guy, he was literally a teenager at the time. I wish I had more to say, but I haven't really listened to a lot of these lower songs as much. Carolyn used to be my least favorite Black Veil Brides song. Seriously, I used to automatically skip it because I thought it just sounded bad. To be fair, the vocals aren't the best, and the main riff gets very samey after a while. I also used to think the lyrics were just another cheesy attempt at pandering to edgy teens, but once I learned the actual meaning behind the song, I really started to enjoy it more. Carolyn was written in honor of guitarist Jake Pitt's mother, who has unfortunately passed away since, I think. Sometimes all it takes is to appreciate something is knowing the true story behind it. Who would have thunk? But anyways, I have some of the same criticisms as I did with the previous 2 entries, just to a lesser degree. The song doesn't feel complete, and he even acknowledged that in an interview later on, which I linked in the description. The vocal harmonies are very out of place, and the drums are seemingly nowhere to be found. Andy's vocals, again, just aren't great here. Can't blame him because he was like 18, but the Restitch version was so much better. Speaking of the Restitch version, this is probably the most special track on the re-recording compared to the original. In that same interview I mentioned earlier, Andy mentioned how since the release of the original record, the band was never fully satisfied with how Carolyn sounded. There was always just this nagging feeling that something could be improved, and wouldn't you know it, Jake and the boys did it amazingly. Restitch's version of Carolyn is by far the biggest improvement on the entire re-recording. You can really tell this song means a lot to the band, as they poured a ton of extra effort into perfecting the sound of the new version. Of course, the vocals and harmonies are better, duh, but there are also so many little details that just make this rendition far superior. CeCe's drums are much better than Sandra's here, because they actually catch the listener's attention, and the guitar work is noticeably smoother. Also, this version has much more of a theatrical, larger-than-life type feel. I think that kind of atmosphere is what the band were going for in the original and couldn't achieve, but in Restitch version, they did accomplish that goal very well. The new version would jump up to at least number 6 on this list, but again, the ranking is based on the original. Sorry I spent so much time talking about the version that's not even ranked, but I think it is well deserved. The Mortician's Daughter is quite obviously from the perspective of someone who's deeply in love with their partner. This track might be higher up on the ranking if I could relate to it, but unfortunately, I cannot. Sad. In the interview I keep mentioning, Andy tells us that he wrote the song about his first serious girlfriend when he was a young teenager, and while yeah, the lyrics are kinda cheesy, I think this is one of those cases where they need to be. The pure unadulterated childhood crush feeling is something that fades away as people get older. I think Andy encapsulated that feeling perfectly in these lyrics. As the actual music goes though, Jink does a good job with the violin. I think he did much better in the re-recording, but this was still pretty good. It's also important to mention that this is the only track on the album without electric guitars, which is cool I guess. It acts as a nice break after Knives and Pens before you're thrown into another screamy track like All Your Hate. There's not much more to say about the original song, so let's move on to the restitch version. This rendition is the weirdest case out of any, taking away all vocals to leave room for instrumental mastery. Jinx vastly improves the violin parts, taking center stage with a beautiful demonstration of that childlike love feeling. Oddly, I think this version only works as a pure instrumental, like putting vocals on it just wouldn't work. I also think the original version with vocals works better with the original instrumentals. I don't know, it's all very confusing. I do enjoy the restitch version on its own, but generally I prefer the original because of the lyrics. This one was particularly hard to rate because it's so close to being two different levels. I generally try not to give .25 ratings to songs, but occasionally I have to make exceptions. Sweet Blasphemy is just a solid piece of music. Lyrically, it deals with religious skepticism and being unapologetic about a lack of religious belief. Andy was raised Catholic, so it's very easy to tell where his inspiration came from. And while the lyrics are quite obviously referring to religious struggles, they could also be used as an anthem for being yourself if that's how you want to use it. I like the softer drums in this one. I think the larger focus on the guitars and vocals really turns Sweet Blasphemy from a decent song to a good one. This is also one of Andy's best vocal performances on the record. The chorus especially feels like he put his heart and soul into it. I actually prefer the original version of the song, which is a pattern that will continue from now on for the most part. I love CC as a drummer, but the We Stitch These Wounds songs in general fit better with the lighter drums rather than heavy ones. I also think the more homemade type atmosphere going on, which the restitched version doesn't really have. The guitars are super beautiful in this one. They aren't as in-your-face as in most of the album, taking a more melodic approach to elevate Andy's vocals, which was definitely the right move. Overall, Sweet Blasphemy definitely earns its status as a community favorite, and it would be higher up on this list if the following songs weren't so good. It was tough to put this above Sweet Blasphemy, but I have my reasons. Beautiful Remains really makes its voice heard with its great guitar work, especially in the bridge. The bridge is really the only reason it's ahead of Sweet Blasphemy. I mean, that solo is just insane. The vocals, on the other hand, are definitely on the rougher side, and the harmonies are a bit weird. Oddly enough, though, I think the rough vocals work better with the instrumentals than the vocals in the re-recording. The screaming especially is really not that good, all things considered, but I actually prefer it to the much smoother screaming from Restitch. I think Beautiful Remains is one of those rare cases where the more unpolished version is better, not because it sounds better, because it doesn't, but because it fits more with the atmosphere. One thing that surprised me on Restitch was that the guitar solo is worse than the original. Like, I don't know what the guys thought was wrong with that part before, but they ended up making it worse, at least in my opinion. One thing that the re-recording improved, though, was the drums. I know I've been pretty harsh on how CC's drumming fits with the songs, but in this case it's much better than the original version. All those factors put both versions at about the same quality for me, but if I'm listening to We Stitch These Wounds, I'm probably looking for a more rough and angry feel anyways. Just one more mention of that guitar. The guitar throughout the whole track is great, again, especially that solo. One of my favorite solos on the album, not including breakdowns. Great job, Jank and Jinx, but yeah, just as a whole, a good track. Definitely a bit rough around the edges, but like I said, it works to an advantage. Children's Surrender is another one of the more emo tracks on this record. Nah, just kidding. I actually really like the message. It's basically about how kids are never understood and that they have to go through early life on their own while facing the negative consequences of not being understood. A little emo, but it could be worse. As for the music, the guitar is of course great again. I love how some acoustic guitars were used in the bridge. It provides a nice contrast to the first half of the album where it's all electric. Additionally, I like how despite its name, Children's Surrender takes a slightly softer approach than the songs around it on the record. It's kind of like the midpoint between Knives and Pens and Sweet Blasphemy, atmosphere-wise. The use of the O's in the chorus, along with less emphasis on the screaming, make this song less overly aggressive and more of a soft but firm message to its listeners. The restitched version obviously undoes some of that though, with CC's heavier drums and a lack of acoustic guitar on the bridge. I still think CC's drumming works better though, it helps provide that horror aspect that the band was originally going for. The guitar, however, is surprisingly worse. They went from sick shredding and a good solo to lower pitched and a worse solo. I don't know why, but the guys decided to tone down the solos in Restitch, but it just doesn't work for me. The bridge also lacks that acoustic section that made it memorable for me. They changed that part to an admittedly cool electric guitar transition, but I still prefer the original for its personality. Another big thing, Children's Surrender is the only song on Restitch where the vocals got worse. Like, yeah, I guess Andy sounds smoother in the re-recording, but the harmonies are worse, and he sounds very drowned out the whole time, most egregiously with the screaming. Considering those reasons, I definitely prefer the original version to the restitch one. I used to not like Perfect Weapon. I don't know what was wrong with me. This song features without a doubt the best guitar solo on the entire record. They can't keep getting away with this. The lyrics seem to be about someone who's out for revenge against their adversary, which I like. Some reasons that Perfect Weapon moved up so far in my ranking over time is of course the guitar solo, but also the riff, which is super addicting, and the vocal harmonies are actually great, which is not common on this album. The screaming is also probably the best on the album, especially in the bridge. Convenient segue into a rant about the bridge. Obviously, as I've said before, the solo is insane. One of Black Veil Bride's best solos for sure. The lead-in in the first half of the bridge is also really good. The evil laugh is iconic, and it's a real shame that they removed it in the restitch version. It's probably the worst change made in the re-recording. The transition from the bridge into the last chorus is also great with Andy screaming, and Sandra's drumming in that part is great. The chorus is pretty solid, nothing amazing but very nice. The verses are a bit slow, but it's not too much of a problem since they fit with the speed of the chorus. One thing I've realized over time listening to this record is that Perfect Weapon is basically just a better version of Beautiful Remains. The riffs are very similar, the melodies are different but feel very close. Both bridges feature a build-up with screaming and the opening riff, and then a fast-paced guitar solo. Maybe I'm yapping about nothing, but Perfect Weapon is just better in every way. Now onto the restitch version. It just feels like a watered-down version of the original. The screaming is drowned out by the intense drumming, and like with Beautiful Remains, the rougher screaming is more effective than its smoother counterpart. I actually prefer Sandra's lighter drumming for most of the track as well, which seems counterintuitive. Andy's vocals as well sound watered down, but also just worse as a whole. In an interview, he mentioned that the restitch version features more of a live performance rendition of the vocals melody-wise, which I guess it makes sense to make adjustments based on your live shows, but it doesn't work for me. The guitar solo is also worse again. Why did they make all the guitar solos worse? As I mentioned earlier, they removed the evil laugh. Why did they remove the evil laugh? It added so much personality. Perfect Weapon had without a doubt one of the worst re-recordings in my opinion. Fortunately though, this ranking is based on the original, which I love. By far the biggest jump in rating compared to the initial rating I gave it on the first listen of the entire album. We Stitch These Wounds seems to be a fan favorite from this album. A lot of non-Black Veil Brides fans I see like this track, and I can see why. The guitar riffs are super addicting, and the lyrics are a little less emo than most of the record. I could listen to these riffs on repeat. Seriously, they're so good. The song is very guitar-centric, featuring a 55-second guitar solo in the bridge. This is one of the rare songs on the album where the bridge isn't my favorite part. That title is taken by the chorus with, of course, those incredible riffs. The vocals throughout the song are very solid, nothing special, but they play their part well. The screaming is also very good, some of the better screaming on the album, and I think this was probably the best balance of screaming of any of the songs. Not too much, just the right amount. The vocal harmonies are also solid. They provide some melodic assistance to add onto the riffs. All the different sounds and melodies are the perfect background for the lyrics, which follow the instrumental's tone of hopefulness with a message of learning from the past and making a better future. A lot of the songs on this album could be described as too overtly angry, like All Your Hate, Knives and Pens, or Perfect Weapon, but We Stitch These Wounds sounds like an epic anthem for those who fight for tomorrow. We also have Restitch on a bit of a redemption arc here. The restitch version of We Stitch These Wounds is one of the best, and while it's still not better than the original, it's definitely very close. The heavier drums work well, especially in the bridge, where I think they're actually an improvement. I also love the addition of the scream at the end of the guitar solo, and the guitar solo itself is the same great quality. But, just like with all the others, the screaming is super drowned out by all the other stuff, which keeps the re-recording from being better. Overall, I really like We Stitch These Wounds, the song. It's a great epic opener for the record, and a great title track. All Your Hate has always been one of my favorites from this album. Its hard-rocking riffs and vocals pack an emotional punch that make it difficult not to headbang. The song acts as an encouragement to those who have been a victim to others' hateful behavior. The lyrics in the chorus, "We learn from all your hate," tell the listener to learn from the wrongdoings of other people in order to make their own lives more fulfilling. All Your Hate lyrically is basically a more aggressive and less introspective version of We Stitch These Wounds, which is cool. I really love the lyrics in this one especially. It's great for an angry mood, especially if there was conflict with someone else. All Your Hate is a more equal balance of guitar and vocals compared to We Stitch, which was mostly guitar. The chorus especially has a much larger emphasis on the vocals, which I might add is super catchy. I like how in the parts with vocals, guitars take more of a backseat but still pack a punch that perfects the atmosphere. My favorite part of the song though is definitely the bridge. The bridge starts off with a sick transition from the chorus and then a monotone yet very headbangable mini solo. It's not exactly a breakdown, but it definitely has that low kind of breakdown energy to it. I also love the screams during this section, definitely one of the best parts on the record. Then the transition out of the bridge is great too, getting one more scream in before the epic final chorus, which also ends in a long drawn out scream, which is super cool. The restitched version unfortunately takes a few steps down. It's the same issue as with Beautiful Remains. The original rougher style fits better with the lyrics and vibe of the song. Andy said in that interview that the new version packs more of an emotional punch, and while I kind of understand his reasoning, it doesn't feel as strong as the original for me. That may just be the autism acting up, but either way I prefer the original. At least the guitar solo didn't get worse, so that's a plus. Definitely not as much of a drop as Perfect Weapon's restitched version though. Both renditions of All Your Hate are good. Again, the original is just better to me personally. I think most of you probably expected Knives and Pens to come in first place, or at least near the top. And for those of you that think I'm just bandwagoning the most popular song, then you would be wrong, because I do actually think Knives and Pens is the best song on the album by a good bit. This is going to be a long one, so buckle your seatbelts, kids. Now, Knives and Pens is obviously the first song ever released by Black Veil Brides. It brought them their first taste of success, and its music video on YouTube has over 140 million views. It's also arguably still their second most popular song after In the End, and is often used as one of the great emo anthems of the early 2010s. It's honestly astounding to me how the original 2009 version gained so much success, because quite honestly it wasn't that good. I know Andy was like 16 or 17 years old when that version was recorded, so I'll cut him some slack, but literally every part of it is worse than the album version. The screams are the most glaring issue. Sounds like Andy was burning holes through his throat the entire time. The guitar riffs and control were also pretty bad compared to the version on the album. But speaking of the album version, obviously it's my favorite song on the record, and I think it improved on literally every aspect of the track, basically. I mean, for starters, Andy's vocals are much smoother, and the vocal melodies were made far superior. Screaming is also pretty good, especially compared to that abysmal crying from the music video version. The vocal harmonies were changed a bit and toned down, which is huge, and the guitar riffs were also made much cleaner and catchier, which is probably the most important change. I won't go through every single change, but those are the important ones. Similar to All Your Hate, Knives and Pens has just the right amount of screaming in it. I know the band used screaming in a lot of the pre-choruses for this album, but it works, so I don't care. The chorus itself is of course super iconic, one of the most iconic rock choruses of the early 2010s if you ask me. My absolute favorite part of the song is the bridge, in my opinion the best stretch of the entire album. It starts by calming everything down for a second, and then transitioning into the breakdown with a scream. The breakdown itself isn't really super unique, to be honest, it's basically just Unholy Confessions still, but better. Despite the blatant copying, I still love the guitar solo embedded within the breakdown. I love it so much. And then of course the final chorus comes in, followed by a short repetition of the breakdown, and that's the song. There is one thing about Knives and Pens that's different than most of the songs on the record though. The restitched version is actually better. Maybe? Okay, maybe not better. Well, maybe. I don't know. I haven't decided which version I prefer, and honestly I don't think I have to. Both versions are great in their own right, and better for certain moods. The original is more angsty and rougher, which works better for an angry mood. The re-recording is a bit more mature, but also epic and adventurous. Obviously, CC's drums make every song more epic, but I think Knives and Pens was his best performance for sure. Andy's vocals for the majority of this version sound noticeably better, most likely because they weren't pitched upwards like with the original. Oddly though, the screaming sounds worse, and I don't just mean because they're drowned out by the instrumentals, I mean they actually just don't sound as good, even compared to the rest of Restitch. I don't know if he was purposely making the screams on this one track sound rougher for nostalgia's sake, but either way it didn't work. That's really the only downside though, as some other improvements were made. By the way, a lot of the things I'm about to mention aren't necessarily improvements, but they fit better with the more epic Restitch version, so keep that in mind. The vocal harmonies throughout the entire track sound more epic, and most notably the woes in the chorus are pitched up to be closer to the music video version, which I like. Alright, I'm cutting this off here, no more yapping. Just kidding, here are some final thoughts. I mentioned it earlier, but Knives and Pens is basically just an altered version of Unholy Confessions by Avenged Sevenfold. The two songs are so similar it's uncanny. Andy gets a lot of hate for ripping off A7X, and while yeah, not the best way to start your career and probably not super ethical, I think Knives and Pens is actually better than Unholy Confessions. Andy was also like 15 at the time of writing this, and I know for a fact that present day Andy wouldn't be so brazen with unoriginality. But that's all I have to say about Knives and Pens. This is by far the most I've ever written for an 8.5 rated song, but I think it was well deserved. You have finally reached the end of my ranking for Black Veil Bride's We Stitch These Wounds. I know that was a lot of ranting. I promise my future projects won't be this long since I basically just reviewed 2 whole albums in this one. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider subscribing. I'm in a close race with my cousin to 100 subscribers. Also look out for future music related content on this channel. This video is the first in a series of 9 Black Veil Bride centered videos, so there's a lot more where this came from. I love Black Veil. They've been my favorite band of this year so far and definitely made it into my top 3 of all time. With that said, thank you so much for watching and have a nice day, guys.